The first time our eyes met, it wasn't fireworks. It was quieter than that, a pause, a breath that lasted too long. The kind that makes the air feel heavier, as if the world itself leans in to listen. She stood by the window, sunlight painting her hair in streaks of gold, one hand holding a coffee cup she never actually drank from. I remember thinking she looked like someone who'd already lived a dozen lifetimes, and didn't trust any of them anymore. I was 24, old enough to think I understood desire, but young enough to still believe it was harmless. She was 40, confident in a way that came from breaking and rebuilding herself more than once. Everything about her was deliberate, the way she moved, the way she looked at people as though she saw right through them, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. That afternoon, I stayed back longer than I should have. She was organizing papers on the table, and I was pretending to help. Every time our hands brushed, my pulse stuttered. Every small silence between us seemed to hum. "You're quiet today," she said, not looking up. "So are you." Her lips curved, slow and knowing. Maybe quiet isn't such a bad thing. There was something in her tone, something that felt like a dare. I watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the movement soft, unguarded. Her perfume lingered, faint vanilla and something floral I couldn't name. It wasn't overpowering, but it stayed in the air, in my head, long after I left. She finally looked at me. Her eyes, brown with a hint of amber, caught the light and held it. For a second, neither of us spoke. The distance between us wasn't even a step, but it felt like a line neither of us was brave enough to cross. "People your age," she began, then stopped, glancing down at the cup in her hand. "They don't stay. They chase moments. They get bored easily. Maybe I'm not like most people my age. That's what they all say," she whispered. But her voice didn't sound cynical. It sounded tired, like someone who wanted to believe but didn't dare to. The air between us thickened. She brushed past me to reach for a file on the shelf, her arm grazing mine, not an accident, not quite intentional either. My breath caught. Her skin was warm. I didn't move. Neither did she. When she turned, her face was inches from mine. Her gaze flicked down, lips, throat, back to eyes. A small pause. A silent question. Then, just as the moment could have broken open into something more, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. She stepped back, quick, too quick, the mask sliding effortlessly back into place. "You should go," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "Before someone gets the wrong idea." But her hand lingered a second longer on my arm, a second too long to mean nothing. I walked out, the scent of her perfume still clinging to me, my heartbeat too loud in my chest. As the door closed behind me, I heard her exhale, a sound halfway between relief and regret. And that's when I realized, this wasn't the beginning of something easy. It was the kind of beginning that ruins you before it saves you. It started with small excuses, reasons to be near her that I told myself were harmless. A file to return. A question to ask. A moment that didn't need to happen, but somehow always did. Weeks passed like that, in soft collisions and careful distance. She had this way of pretending nothing was happening, as if she didn't notice how my voice changed when I said her name. But she noticed. I could tell by the way she looked anywhere but me whenever the air got too quiet between us. I learned little pieces of her past, not because she told me, but because they slipped out in fragments, in the pauses between her sentences. She'd been married once. "A long time ago," she said. "He was kind, just not present." The way she said it made me think that maybe kindness wasn't enough. Maybe she'd learned that love without attention feels like loneliness dressed up as comfort. I wanted to ask more, but she had this invisible line she never let me cross, and every time I got close, she'd change the subject or smile in that polite way that ends a conversation before it even starts. One evening, I found her sitting alone in the office, the light from her desk lamp spilling across her face. She looked softer. Tired but beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfection. "You're still here," I said. "I could say the same for you," she replied, her voice low, almost teasing. There was silence after that, not awkward, just full. The kind that made every sound sharper, every breath louder. She reached for a folder, and her sleeve brushed against my hand. It wasn't intentional, but she didn't move right away either. Her fingers hovered just near mine, and the space between them felt like a decision waiting to happen. "You should be out somewhere," she said finally, her tone trying to sound casual. "Living. Meeting people your age." I smiled. "Maybe I already met someone I want to know." Her breath caught, just slightly, and then she looked away. "You don't know what you're saying." "Maybe I do." For a moment neither of us moved. I could see the conflict flicker in her eyes, attraction tangled with caution. She wasn't just older, she was wiser, heavier with experience, carrying ghosts I hadn't lived long enough to understand. But something in her expression, the way her lips parted before she spoke, the way she seemed to fight herself just to stay still, told me she felt it too. When she finally stood, she brushed past me, close enough that her perfume filled the space between us. My hand moved before I could stop it, just a touch, my fingers grazing her wrist. She froze. It wasn't a question, or a confession. It was a pause, long enough to say everything we couldn't. And then she turned, eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, she didn't hide the way she looked at me. No words. Just that quiet, unbearable nearness. Something had shifted, not enough to be love, not yet. But enough to make walking away impossible. The next few days were a blur of everything unsaid. We spoke less, but our silences grew louder. Every time I walked past her office, I felt it, that magnetic pull either of us wanted to name. One late afternoon, rain started tapping against the windows, soft and restless. Everyone else had left early. She stayed behind, typing something that didn't need to be finished tonight. I stayed too, pretending to sort through paperwork I wasn't even reading. The sound of her typing slowed, then stopped. "You don't have to wait around, you know," she said without looking up. "Maybe I just like the quiet," I replied. Her lips curved faintly. "Quiet can be dangerous." I stepped closer before I thought it through, close enough to see the way a strand of her hair had fallen loose, brushing her cheek. She didn't move. My hand twitched like it wanted to fix it, but I stopped. I could feel her watching the hesitation. And then, footsteps echoed from down the hall. We both stiffened. "Someone's here," she whispered. My pulse jumped. The door was half open. For one impossible second, she reached out, grabbed my arm, and pulled me behind the tall cabinet near her desk. We stood there, pressed too close in the dim space, our breathing caught somewhere between fear and something else entirely. The air was warm, heavy. Her shoulder brushed against my chest. I could smell her, soft perfume, a trace of rain from her hair. The footsteps passed, fading. Neither of us moved. Her eyes lifted to mine, barely inches away. "You should go," she murmured, but her fingers were still gripping my sleeve. "I know," I whispered back. But I didn't move. It felt inevitable, the closeness, the tension tightening between us like the air before a storm. My hand found her wrist again, the same spot as before, but this time she didn't pull away. She just breathed out slowly, eyes fluttering shut for half a second. Then, her phone buzzed on the desk. The sound was sharp, jarring. She flinched, stepping back too quickly. The moment shattered. "See?" she said quietly, forcing a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Dangerous." She turned away, but her voice trembled slightly, betraying her calm. "People would talk. They always do. I don't care what they say." "You should." I watched her shoulders tense. She was trying to convince herself more than me. When she finally looked back, her expression was soft, defeated, almost. "You make it hard to remember what's right," she said. I didn't answer. I just reached out, brushing my fingers over the edge of her desk, close, but not touching her this time. And yet, even in that distance, something had changed again. We were no longer pretending this wasn't real. We were only pretending we could still stop it, Why heavy checkmark prompt 5, the twist, raising the stakes again, 500 words, writing prompt, introduce a revelation that changes everything. Instructions, a new truth comes out, someone lied, overheard, or admits hidden feelings. Flip expectations, what felt safe now feels risky. Show reactions that feel personal and sensual, not just words, but the way their bodies react in silence, stepping back, trembling hands, brushing past each other too closely. Heighten the attraction and fear at the same time. End with a decision or moment that pushes them toward the inevitable climax. The next morning, everything felt different. Her messages stopped. No good morning, no half-written replies. Just silence. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to her house, every mile heavier than the last. When she opened the door, she didn't seem surprised to see me, just tired. Her hair was tied back, her expression guarded. "We shouldn't talk here," she said quietly. But she let me in. The house was dim, curtains half drawn, the faint smell of coffee and rain still in the air. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the way her hands trembled as she set the mug down made me pause. Finally she spoke. "He knows." My chest tightened. "Who?" "My ex-husband." She looked up at me, eyes red, voice barely steady. "He came by last night. Said someone saw us?" For a second, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to narrow to the soft click of the clock on the wall, and the space between us. "I told him it was nothing," she continued, almost pleading. "That you're just, don't say it." I cut in. "Don't say just a friend." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "You don't understand. He could ruin things for me, for both of us." Her voice cracked, and for a moment the distance between us dissolved. She reached out, fingers brushing mine before pulling back like she'd touched fire. "Do you believe me?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Did you lie?" She froze. The question hung there, heavier than any touch. "I tried not to," she whispered. "But I panicked." I stepped closer, close enough to see the small tremor in her lips, the way her breath came faster even though she was trying to look composed. "You said I'd break your heart?" I murmured. "But you never said you'd start first." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached for me, slow, hesitant, her fingers tracing the edge of my sleeve before resting over my hand. "This shouldn't have happened," she said. "But tell me it didn't mean anything and I'll stop." I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. So I didn't answer. I just stood there, feeling her pulse beneath my fingertips, fast, uneven, alive. Then, suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the porch. Someone outside. She pulled away instantly, her face pale. "Go," she whispered. "Not until you tell me, go!" The knock came sharp and loud, and for a heartbeat, our eyes locked, panic, regret, and something that felt too much like love all tangled together. I turned toward the back door, but she caught my wrist just before I left. "If this ends," she said softly, "I want you to know I didn't lie about everything." "Which part was true?" I asked. She looked at me, voice barely a whisper. "All the parts that hurt." And then the doorbell rang again, louder this time, cutting through the silence like a final warning neither of us could ignore. The rain hadn't stopped since that day. It drummed softly against the windows, the world outside blurred and gray, a kind of mercy, hiding everything that shouldn't be seen. I hadn't planned to come back. But when she opened the door, she didn't seem surprised. Just tired again. Like she'd been waiting for this moment, and dreading it in equal measure. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe because I can't pretend anymore." The living room felt smaller than before, or maybe it was just the space between us. She stood near the couch, her arms folded, but her eyes never left mine. I could see the same storm behind them that I'd been carrying all week. "You shouldn't have come," she said, softer this time. "Then tell me to leave," I said. She didn't. Instead, she took a small step closer, enough that I could see the faint tremble in her hands, the rise and fall of her chest as she tried to steady her breath. "This will ruin us," she whispered. "Then let it," I said. Her eyes closed for a second, like the words physically hit her. When she opened them again, something in her had shifted, not softer, not harder, just honest. "I told him it was over," she said. "That I didn't feel anything anymore. But I lied." Her voice broke at the end of it, and that was all it took. I stepped closer, close enough that her perfume blurred with the scent of rain, close enough that I could hear the tiny hitch in her breath. "You think this is wrong?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Every part of it." "Then why are you shaking?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached up, not to pull me closer, not yet, but to trace her fingers against my face, like she was memorizing something she shouldn't. Her touch was hesitant at first, then certain. My hand found hers, held it there, against my jaw. "Say it," I murmured. "Say you don't want this." She didn't. Instead, she leaned in, forehead resting against mine, eyes closed. The silence between us was deafening, the kind that makes the air feel alive. "If I do this," she said finally, her voice shaking, "I can't take it back. Neither can I." The space between us disappeared, not in some perfect, cinematic way, but like gravity had finally won. Her breath brushed against my lips, her fingers tangled in the fabric of my shirt. The world outside could have been ending, and I wouldn't have noticed. And then she stopped. Just before it happened. Just before everything crossed the line. Her eyes opened, glassy and unsure. "Tell me this isn't just a moment," she whispered. "It's not," I said. "It never was." For a long second, either of us moved. The rain slowed, the house creaked, and the truth hung between us, heavy, irreversible, real. She finally exhaled, her hand still resting over my heart. "Then whatever happens next," she said, "we don't run from it." And for the first time, either of us did. Morning light slipped through the half-open curtains, soft and forgiving, the kind that made everything look gentler than it really was. The storm had passed, but its scent still lingered in the air, rain, coffee, and the faint trace of her perfume on my sleeve. She sat at the edge of the couch, hair still damp from the shower, a towel draped loosely around her shoulders. For a while, either of us said anything. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was quiet in a way that felt earned. "I didn't think you'd stay," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But leaving felt worse." She gave a small smile, one that didn't try to hide the exhaustion behind it. "You make things harder than they need to be." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe that's just how it is when something actually matters." She looked at me then, really looked, and something inside her seemed to loosen. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, no trace of that careful distance she used to keep between us. Just warmth. I moved closer, slowly, like testing gravity again. Her hand was resting on her knee, and when I reached for it, she didn't pull away. Her fingers slipped into mine with a kind of quiet acceptance, as if we'd both stopped pretending that this wasn't real. "You know what people would say," she murmured. "Let them talk," I said. "They don't know what it's like to finally feel seen." She blinked, eyes soft, and I could see it, the years she'd spent building walls, keeping her heart guarded behind calm smiles and half-truths. Now, for once, the walls were gone. Her thumb brushed the back of my hand, slow and absent-minded. "You don't understand," she said. "When you're my age, love starts to feel like a story that happened to someone else." "Then let's write a new one," I said. A small laugh escaped her, quiet, shaky, but real. The kind that catches in the throat and warms everything it touches. She leaned in, resting her head against my shoulder. The room felt smaller again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was safe. Outside, the rain started up again, a soft drizzle tapping against the window. I could feel her breathing, slow and even now, her hands still tangled with mine. "This doesn't have to make sense to anyone else," I said. She nodded slightly against me. It won't, she whispered. But that's what makes it ours. I turned just enough to press my lips against her forehead. She closed her eyes, and for the first time either of us was running, not from guilt, not from fear, not from the weight of what we were. We just sat there, letting the morning light settle over us, holding on like we'd finally decided to stop fighting what had already found us. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?